and happy Interdependence Day. Um, I have to say that while I have done um, some videos solo on my own, um, for some reason this time doing it, I'm very nervous. But I think there's something very refreshing uh, about being transparent. So I'm just going to get that out of the way here in the beginning. So, always around this time of year, um, I, excuse me, I contemplate, 4th of July and Independence Day and what it means. And it definitely doesn't mean the same thing to everybody. And I shudder, quite frankly, to think how the Native American population of the United States of America must feel on this day, because for them it was not a day when their independence was given. It is a day when their independence was taken, and naturally it wasn't taken in a day. It was taken over time with the arrival of the Europeans. So I'm going to be touching on this theme today, and I have a lot of things that I would like to weave together, and so um, I will um, do my best. And you'll see me referring to my phone because I've made some little notes of things that I want to um, touch on. So for me, I don't call this Independence Day, which is why I have titled the video Inter pardon me, Interdependence Day. And why is that? Well, that's because almost anything we can think of is interdependent. Um, you may remember or know of the naturalist named John Muir. He was an author who resided before he passed away in California. And he has a famous quote that says, "When you tug at a single thing in nature, you realize it is connected to everything else in the world." And so our history, our life is interdependent. It's interdependent of um, it's many things coming together, right? So, for instance, even in the United States of America, when it was voted on what would be the primary language of this country, 13 people voted, and the vote was 7-6, English to German. So we could easily be speaking German right now rather than English. But that's just one tiny example. So, even our body, we are not just our eyes or just our ears. We are not just our arms or our legs. Um, we are a whole body made up of the sum of its parts. And so there's another example of interdependence. But I think you get what I am getting at. Um, that nothing exists really on its own. We don't have um, flowers if we don't have pollinators. So the ecosystem is probably the best example of interdependence that I could give you. So um, I also wanted to talk about the victim-perpetrator wound. So part of the reason that many Europeans came to the United States was because they were um, being mistreated in their own countries, and they were fleeing. They were seeking freedom, and many of them were fleeing persecution. And so this victim perpetrator wound goes very far back in our history. And when I think about, when I think about, for instance, all of the cultures that exist on the continent of Africa, or I think about the many tribes in the United States of America, I realize that even prior to slavery and even prior to Europeans arriving in the United States, that there were tribes in the United States that warred amongst themselves for various reasons, and the same in Africa. So tribes all over the world have practiced war and have enslaved each other in one way or another. Nevertheless, it doesn't make it doesn't make it okay when somebody from another culture comes and does that, right? So war is really never okay, and I think that's obvious, and I think that we are realizing it is such an outdated mode of solving problems. So, the victim perpetrator wound, which is explained very well in a book by John Lamb Lash called Not in His Image. And the book opens up with a story about a woman from Alexandria named Hypatia. And Hypatia was of the mystery schools, and she was a well noted astronomer, mathematician, and a philosopher, and she knew her way around geometry. She was a very powerful woman, and her father was also very powerful. But when Christianity started to spread, she got vocal, and the patriarchy found her to be a threat. So they killed her. And if you explore that book, Not in His Image by John Lamb Lash, you will see how that one event really played a key role in history. So, the victim perpetrator wound, we tend to think, or it can be thought of, that Europeans came here and they were the perpetrator, and um, the natives of this land were the victims. And certainly we could say this is true. But what I'm interested is in tracing these roots, because the victim perpetrator wound is cyclical. So you see this in families where you see generations of sexual abuse, or generations of alcoholism, or generations of very unhealthy patterns that seem to carry on from one generation to the next. So, often sexual perpetrators were uh, first victims, right? And so, what I'm positing here that I think doesn't get talked about, it's not a justification. It's it's a way to look at something, to broaden our view and consider something we may not have considered before. Um, Often, when we think of native cultures around the world, or when we think of shamans or high priests and priestesses, we think of indigenous cultures. But it's important to remember that in everybody's ancestral bloodline, we are all indigenous to somewhere, and we all had spiritual practices and ways of being in community and ways of living in harmony with the earth that were wiped out because they were seen as a threat um, to the patriarchy. So, what I'm saying here is that many Europeans who were victims in their own land came to be perpetrators in somebody else's land. And it's a global virus at this point. And much of humanity is putting their efforts towards thinking about this through a very broad lens and how we can transform, transmute, and transcend this pattern. So, not an easy job, but we are working on it. So, let's talk about ancestors and memories and patterns and traumas and gifts and our lineage and how it's all woven together. So, when we think of ancestors, we can tend to think of our own family and our own family tree, and that as being our ancestral lineage. Well, because we are multidimensional beings, and because some people would refer to them as past lives, I refer to them as, um, I see it in that we don't have past lives as much as we have the avatar called Julie Pershin, who's living in this physical life in Oregon. And then there are many um, other dimensions that I live in as well. And many people refer to those as past lives. So, in all of my dimensions or past lives, whoever I was connected to through family lineage, those are also my ancestors. But if we consider interdependence and we consider that we are one human family, then that really broadens our perspective to know that any human being on this planet who has come and gone before us is indeed our ancestor. And I think this really helps to broaden our perspective. Some people like to say, well, it wasn't me who did that to the Native Americans, or it wasn't my family that did that to the Native Americans. And we sort of shirk responsibility. And I'm not advocating that we take the weight of the world on our shoulders and say, oh, I'm responsible for all of this. But I am advocating beginning to think, what role am I playing from here going forward? How can I be of service to humanity in healing the victim perpetrator wound? When have I been the victim? When have I been the perpetrator? And how can I heal, transform, transcend, and transmute and alchemize those things within myself so that I no longer carry those patterns? It's a big question. It's worth some contemplation. And it is a question that leads towards peace and harmony within yourself and within humanity. Um, the other thing I'd like to discuss is that we talked about everything being interconnected, right? So it's not just human beings who have experienced um, the horrors of human history. It is our Mother Earth. It is Gaia herself who has also been traumatized by our actions here on Earth. And you may have heard of the term quantum entanglement, and or you may have heard of something called the butterfly effect. And so this is really to say that everything indeed is interconnected and everything does affect everything else. So when we do the work on ourselves to heal the victim and to heal the perpetrator and to break these break these chains and heal these patterns, then we are serving everybody. We are serving Mother Earth, and we are serving our ancestors, both in this life and other lives. And we are helping the ancestors of our human family, and we are transforming our consciousness. Um, Lots of people talk about shadow work and the dark things that may be hidden in our subconscious, or the dark things that are conscious that we would rather push away or not deal with because they are too painful. And sometimes we don't have the tools or the resources, or we don't know where to begin. Sometimes our central nervous system is so dysregulated that we can't even fathom getting into a place where we feel stable and safe enough to really have a look at these things and start to heal them. And some people are so traumatized that the rest of their life, from whenever the beginning point of that trauma was, is literally taken over by a traumatic event. Um, Either there are repressed memories, or the experience loops over and over in the central nervous system, producing the same chemicals, and one might never get out of this state of being in trauma. And then, so for those of us who can, who have um, done our homework and found the tools and found the resources and um, can work on transforming trauma within ourselves, is a huge undertaking, and I feel something we must take accountability for and begin to work with. And um, it's lifelong work, and it's very worthwhile work. So, going back to what I was saying about trauma and Mother Earth and all the wars that she's experienced, and then thinking about quantum entanglement and such. You know, there are people, Shaman Durek is a good example. I was listening to one of his podcasts, and he said that he was in a place where there had been um, murder and shooting, and he kept hearing gunshots in the air and hearing screaming, and he didn't understand why. And after further investigation, he learned that at that very place that he was in, where he was hearing the gunshots and the screams, formerly there had been murder that had happened, and but not in the present time, in the past, yet it was still in the field, and so he could presence that. So I make a parallel there to any place on earth where there has been war or the mistreatment of humans by other humans, or the mistreatment of animals by humans. Um, there's an energy field in that place that is left with imprints. So, you know, the subtle always translates to the gross. So when we heal something on a gross physical level, that does change the subtle energy field as well. Um, so I wanted to mention a website called Green Hope Essences. I've put a link in the description box to their website. They have a flower essence, so their whole website is dedicated to flower essences, which they grow themselves. And it was actually Gaia herself who led them to grow flowers for a flower essence called Gaia Knows Best. And Gaia gave um, the instruction to the people who run Green Hope Essences that she would like them to make a flower essence that encourages people to co create with her. In other words, at this state of her growth and this stage of her life, she would like to begin to co create with humans. And this is a good flower essence if you are somebody who is interested in co creating life from here forward with Mother Earth. Another thing about this essence, Gaia Knows Best, this flower essence that you can order on greenhopeessences.com, is that you can bring it. You can bring some of this flower essence um, any place where you know there has been traumatic events on Earth. And you can put some of that flower essence on the earth as a means of healing her. And very potent because she asked for this essence to be made. And so, no doubt, she will receive it and use it to her own benefit for healing. If you get a chance to visit greenessences.com, they have a huge appendix um, which tells you about each of their flower essence formulas. They have single essences and they have blends. And on there, you can read more about how Gaia Knows Best came into being. And it's a beautiful story. It's a beautiful story. Gaia asked that they grow the flowers to be incorporated into this formula, and she asked that they plant. She let them know which flowers she would like to be part of this flower essence, and asked them to plant these flowers in certain formations, and also that after they planted them, that they do not um, go back into that area until the flowers are ready to be harvested. Um, I'm only giving you a little glimpse of the story, but it's a beautiful one, so I hope you'll check that out. You can go to greenessences.com and type in Gaia Knows Best, and there you'll find the story about it. So let's see what else I wanted to share with you today. My feelings on Interdependence Day and the Victim-Perpetrator wound, and how we can co-create with Mother Earth. And I've been thinking quite a bit lately about memory and how memory works. And I listen to Joe Dispenza quite a bit, and he talks about memory. And I think lots of scientists are starting to have evidence that the way that we remember something isn't always as it happened. In other words, the memory is not infallible. And so we might consider that too. Like, if we've had a traumatic event, maybe we don't remember exactly how it happened, but we feel our trauma in the present moment, and we have feelings and emotions around that event. And so then how can we work with our feelings and emotions to heal this trauma? And does it or does it not matter that we may have incorrect memory? I'm not going to answer that question. I think it's a question for further contemplation. But certainly, so we have our individual memory, and then humanity has a collective memory. But if we're not remembering things exactly as they happened, how does that affect the way forward? Um, Joe Dispenza said that memory without an emotional charge becomes wisdom. I think that's very important. And also, when we have a memory, then we entertain a memory, then we are living in the past. And, there's so much talk about living in the present, right? Which is the only place we can live, because the past, well, if you're talking quantum physics, the past and the present and the future exist simultaneously. However, we are here right now in the present. So then how does that affect us physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, physiologically, if our mind is spent living in the past or dreaming about a future? It is definitely okay to do things in the present moment that feed the seeds that you've planted for your future, right? Again, interdependence. Um, so the other thing I wanted to talk about today is a movie that has come out, and it's called Sound of Freedom. There's a man named Tim Ballard, and he formerly worked for Homeland Security, and then he founded something called Operation Underground Railroad. And for 5 or 6 years now, he's been working on a movie called Sound of Freedom, uh, about child sex trafficking. And it came out today. So I strongly encourage you to go see this. I know that many of us, when we were um, um, able to have more time to ourselves around the time of COVID, where we stayed home more and maybe didn't go to the office every day or didn't go to our job because we could work from home, or for whatever reason, lots of people during COVID had more time to start looking into things that they had hunches about or knew about or were interested in, but because of the design of their everyday life, maybe hadn't been able to give as much attention to those things as they would like. And so, the beauty of the internet is that it's full of information. It's an Akashic record of sorts. It's not to say that there's not misinformation on the internet, but there is lots of good information out there. So, right around the time COVID came out, a lot of things started being talked about, right? It's like there was this great unveiling, and we were starting to look at, okay, well, where issues of race came up. You saw Black Lives Matter, the Me Too movement, all about, the sexual abuse of women and so forth. And then the subject of human trafficking and child trafficking came up. And I just want to point out a pattern. If you're watching this, you may already be very aware of this. But you may notice how many times the collective will bring something up, like the shadow side of the pharmaceutical industry, or human trafficking, or child sex trafficking, or genetically modified food, right? And um, because these things concern us, we share information. And then in this age of disinformation, we are told that no, we fact checked that, that's not correct, or some establishment or some social media platform um, suppresses our voice, or certain books become banned, or and one of the main things is using the term conspiracy theory to uh, to quash any movement where there is an unveiling of a shadow. And I think it's plenty obvious by now that almost everything that was um, said to be a conspiracy theory that's been brought up since COVID um, is now proven to be true. That there are facts, that there's hard evidence that yes, child trafficking is a thing. And yes, politicians are involved. And yes, Hollywood is involved, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So um, you could consider it to be a very ugly time because all of these terrible things are coming to the surface, but you could consider it a beautiful time because all of these things are coming to the surface. And so um, they can't continue because they are being unveiled. So we still have a lot of work to do. But um, the curtain has been pulled back on so many issues. And if we just keep working together to heal our own traumas and heal our own woundings, and to go out into the world and do some good, whether that's volunteering at an animal shelter, or um, donating to the Underground Railroad operation, or whether it's what pick a lane, any lane, pick a passion and dedicate yourself to it. um, I am still finding my way through putting my passions out into the world. I've always loved to write since I was a little girl, and I've loved to sing. I've loved to use my voice. I get really excited about sharing information. I'm excited about health in the body, which is why I was in the healthcare sector for many years as an acupuncturist. In the state of New Mexico, acupuncturists can actually be primary care providers. So, I've been we're called doctors of Oriental medicine in that state. And so, I've lived a life of service up till now, helping people in one way or another. But now my spirit really said, no, I want to use my voice, and I do that by writing. I have a blog on creatorsofnewearth.com that I write. And then I have this channel where you see I bring on guests, um, or I might come on here like today and share some of my thoughts and share some things I'm contemplating or things I'm moving through. And so this is spirit and passion and higher self um, interdependently working together to say, hey, live your blueprint. If I look at my human design and I look at my Mayan calendar glyph and I look at my astrology, everything that I am finally doing now, including offering mentorship and intuitive guidance, is now all coming online. And so I say this to say that, some of you might be working at a job that you hate and you're miserable there, but you do it for the money or whatever that is, right? Now, we all know that as humans, we have very practical needs. We need a roof over our head, and we need food in our belly, and we need some clothes on our back. But I'm here to say that if you really do what spirit and source is asking you to do, and usually they're only asking you to do something that is already in line with your passions or something that they know you excel at. If you listen to your heart's calling and your heart's desire, and you allow yourself to be guided by spirit, you don't have to stay at that shitty job. Spirit and your higher self will find a way to make sure that you are taken care of. And sometimes you have to take a leap of faith and just trust, and it can be scary. But once you find out how supported you are by spirit, and once you find out what you're made of, if you just walk through your fears, even in the face of them, you start to build more trust, more confidence, more faith that if you go in the direction of your dreams, you're actually helping the world by helping yourself and by co-creating with spirit. And so I'd like to encourage you to do that. And think about how that plays into the theme of interdependence that we're talking about here today. And even the victim-perpetrator wound. Like, we may have been a victim of somebody else's doubt, and so we never pursued our dream. How, I guess I'm just asking for that you give yourself some time to contemplate these things and see how they kind of all fit together like pieces of a puzzle, or they all weave like threads in the tapestry. You know, how can we heal this victim perpetrator wound in ourselves and in the world? Where do we want to give our time, our energy? Are we living our dream? Are we using our voice? Are we following our heart? Who are we listening to? What are we listening to? What are we participating in? What do we no longer want to participate in? How are our beliefs and memories affecting our reality? And where do we want to play? And who exactly are our ancestors? And how might we honor them? And how can we call forth our own gifts from our ancestral lineage? You can speak with your ancestors. I do it at my altar. You don't have to be at your altar. You could be anywhere. You could say, okay, I'm on this mission, or have this new dream, and I know y'all have some great qualities that could really help me at this time. Help me find those qualities, those gifts, those talents within myself, so that I can carry on um, um, the gifts of my ancestral lineage as I build my dream. So these are some thoughts I had about co-creating with Mother Earth, and about history, and about our own history, and how we are multifaceted, that we think that we are just this body, but we are interdimensional and multidimensional. You can look at it as past lives, or you can look at it as you're having many lives and in many dimensions simultaneously. And how can you use the gifts of the many yous in all dimensions in this avatar, this physical body, to create your life? And I also wanted to talk a little bit for a minute before I get off here about the word history. So you may already know his story, right? So we are in this halfway through the post-Atlantean epoch, and patriarchy is swiftly crumbling. That's for the better. And but we're not looking for, okay, well, the pendulum swung way this way, so now it's going to go to the matriarchy, right? We're not looking for that. We're looking for a balance. So we don't just want his story, and we don't just want hers story. So I notice people often replace herstory with history. And what we really want is our story, right? So you might try playing around with that. Every time you catch yourself wanting to say history, try inserting the word our story. And maybe offer it up to your friends or family or the people around you. And we can seed the collective consciousness with that word, our story, because that's what it's always been from the beginning. And that's what it needs to be going forward, is that we are consciously co-creating our story. Um, and words very much affect our consciousness, our unconsciousness, and our subconscious. So I feel that their words are very important. So if we continue to use the word his story, well, it's just going to continue to be his story, and we need it to be our story. So how might you entertain that in your everyday life? Let me see if I've missed any notes, and then I won't keep you. I'm actually, well, I don't want to say I'm supposed to be doing something else. I'm supposed to be doing this, but on every Monday and Tuesday, I write a blog, and I have a pretty hefty blog that I was working on yesterday, and I need to resume working on it now. So I'm not going to stay on here too much longer. For those of you who don't know, I think I mentioned earlier, I have a website called creatorsofnewearth.com, and every week I come out with a new blog. And I've been doing a chakra series, which has been really fun. I myself have been learning a lot of new things about the chakras, things I never knew. I never knew about the 5 vayus and the 5 koshas, and um, it's really deepening my relationship to myself to write these blogs. So this week I'm writing on uh, the third eye, and so it's a 9-part series. There's an introductory, and then I go through there's an introductory piece, and then I go through each chakra one by one. And then the last piece I write is going to be called Chakra Palooza, which I think is a pretty fun name. And then even on this YouTube channel right here, I've done a chakra series with my mentor. We'll be doing the last chakra, the 7th chakra, the crown chakra, this coming Sunday. So keep your eyes peeled for that. That'll be at noon. So as I was saying, oh, here's an interesting note about memory. Remember how I was talking that memory doesn't always, we're not always remembering things exactly the way they happened. This says, every time you remember an event from the past, your brain networks change in ways that can alter the later recall of the event. It's very much in line with what Joe Dispenza was saying about memory. So Sound of Freedom, this movie I was talking about that just dropped today on child sex trafficking. So 1.2 million children per year are involved in sex trafficking, are victims of sex trafficking. And it's and then human trafficking overall is $150 billion per year industry, with 40 million people currently enslaved. So what is independent, and who gets to be independent? And isn't it the interdependence of humanity that can help break the chains of those who are enslaved? And what is the victim perpetrator wound? Are you carrying it? And if so, how can you heal it? And how can you look within yourself to see if there's anything you've been a victim of that you haven't healed? And is there any time that you've been a perpetrator that you haven't forgiven yourself for? And how can that contribute to your spiritual growth? And how can it help humanity to heal and to flower and to blossom? And as Yeshua says, there is no healing. There's only love. So with that, I'll be signing off. Thank you for listening. I hope that I have said something here today that will be of use to you. And I don't know, I was so darn nervous, but I was. And but I did it anyway. And that's an example of how, you know, we must do things anyway in the face of fear. And in this way, we build our confidence and our trust and our faith. Thank you for being here. And I hope you have a beautiful Interdependence Day. And we'll see you on Sunday. Thanks for listening. Ciao for now.